When investigators started going through everything they had, the footage, the physical details, the timeline, 5 specific things kept coming up. 5 things that were hard to look past. And the first one involves something so small, so easy to miss, that most people watching that camera footage would have overlooked it completely. It involves a glove. Just one glove. When you look at the security camera footage from that night, the masked figure is carrying something. A bag. Now, before you think that is not a big deal, let me explain why investigators found this interesting. Because it is not just that they were carrying a bag, it is what kind of bag it was. It was a paper bag, not plastic. Paper. Why does that matter? Here is why. Paper bags are terrible for keeping fingerprints. If you touch a plastic bag, your fingerprints can stay on it for a long time. Science can find them. But paper? Paper absorbs moisture. It is rough. Fingerprints do not hold well on paper. So if someone wanted to carry something without leaving a print behind, paper is actually a smart choice. Now, does that mean the person carrying it was thinking about fingerprints? Maybe, maybe not. But it is something that made investigators pay attention. And then they noticed the glove.
The figure in the footage is wearing one glove, not 2, just one, on their dominant hand, the hand they would use to touch things, to open things, to hold things. One glove. That is a strange detail. If you are cold, you wear 2 gloves. If you forgot your gloves, you wear none. One glove on just the hand you use most is specific. And here is where this gets chilling. People who knew Tommaso Cioni have noted, in accounts that have been documented, that he had a habit, a small, personal habit that most people would never think twice about. He often wore just one glove on his dominant hand in cold weather. Not a pair, just the one. Now, and I need you to hold this thought, that alone is not proof of anything. Plenty of people wear a single glove. It could mean nothing at all. But pair it with the paper bag. Pair it with the mask. Pair it with the fact that this person moved through that home like they had been there before. And you start to see not just a figure on a screen, you start to see a pattern. And the second detail is something you literally cannot fake, because it is written right on your face.
The mask the figure is wearing in the footage covers most of their face. Most of it, not all of it. The eyes and the area just above the eyes, the eyebrows, they are still visible. Now you might think, okay, eyebrows, what can you really tell from eyebrows? A lot, it turns out. A whole lot. When specialists study faces, particularly for identification, one of the things they look at very carefully is the shape and structure of the area around the eyes, the arch of the brow, the spacing, the thickness, the way the inner edge begins, and the way the outer edge ends. This area of the face is actually one of the most stable parts of your appearance. It does not change much with age. It does not change with weight gain or loss. It is part of the bone structure beneath the skin. Think of it like this. Your eyebrows are almost like a signature that belongs to your skull. Analysts who reviewed the footage noted something. The shape of the eyebrows on the masked figure, the arch, the specific way they were groomed, the symmetry, was described in documented reports as, and I am quoting directly, consistent and notable when compared to photographs of Tommaso Cioni. Now, let me be honest with you. Consistent is not, it's definitely him. That is not what this means. Analysts are careful with their words for a reason. What it means is, the brows do not rule him out. They point in his direction. In a case with very little physical evidence, something that points in a direction matters. But here is where this story takes a turn I did not see coming the first time I studied this case. Because just when you think the investigation is moving in one direction, you find out something about how that investigation actually worked behind the scenes. And it raises a question that a lot of people following this case are still asking. In the early days after Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, investigators were looking at 2 possibilities at the same time. The first was someone she knew, someone with access to her home, her routine, her life. The second was a stranger, someone who came from outside her world, someone who had been watching her, following her, waiting for the right moment. Both of those possibilities were real. Both deserved investigation.
And from what has been reported, the investigators took both seriously. But here is the question that a lot of people close to this case have started asking. As the physical evidence, the glove, the eyebrows, the way the figure moved through that house, began pointing more and more towards someone who was already familiar with that space, did the investigation move fast enough in that direction?
I am not saying anyone did anything wrong. Investigations are complicated. There are rules about what you can do and what you cannot do without enough evidence. You cannot just point at someone and say, "It was them." You need proof. But there is a window in every case, a window where the most important things can still be found, and that window does not stay open forever. Every day that passes, memories fade, physical evidence disappears, people change their stories. And this brings us to the third detail, which is not about anything physical at all. It is about something much harder to see. It is about the way a person moves when they think no one is watching. I want you to think about something for a moment. Have you ever walked into a dark room in your own home in the middle of the night? Not a new room, your kitchen, your hallway. You move differently in a space you know, don't you? You don't slow down at the doorway. You don't hesitate. You already know how many steps it takes to reach the light switch. You know which side of the bed is yours. You know which drawer sticks. Your body remembers the space, even when your brain is half asleep. Now think about that same idea, but in someone else's home. If you broke into a house you had never been to before, how would you move? Slowly, carefully. You would stop at every doorway. You would not know what was around the corner. You would be nervous, checking, looking around constantly. That is not what the figure in the footage does. The figure moves through Nancy Guthrie's home with what analysts who reviewed the footage described as calm, deliberate movement. No unnecessary stopping, no confusion about where things are, no looking around like someone trying to figure out a new space. They navigate. There is a big difference between exploring a space and navigating a space. Exploring means you are learning as you go. Navigating means you already know the way. People who study behavior in cases like this have a term for this kind of movement. They call it spatial familiarity. It means your body is moving the way a body moves when it already knows where it is. And Tommaso Cioni had been inside Nancy Guthrie's home many, many times before. That is a documented fact. Now, I want to be fair here. Someone who had watched Nancy's home from the outside for a long time could also learn the layout. That is not impossible. We will come back to that. But combined with detail 1 and detail 2, this pattern is getting harder to ignore. And detail number 4. Detail number 4 is the one I personally find the most unsettling, because it makes you realize that in this case, even the mistakes might not be mistakes at all. Let me ask you something. If you were going to do something very, very serious, and you absolutely did not want to get caught, would you leave obvious mistakes behind? Of course not. You would be careful, you would plan, you would cover every track you could think of. Now here is where this case gets really interesting. When people first looked at the camera footage, they noticed a few things that seemed like mistakes. The figure lets their face get partially visible at a couple of angles. They leave the paper bag behind. They do not fully disable the camera. A lot of people's first thought was, okay, this person was not very smart. They were sloppy, they panicked. But one of the behavioral analysts who looked at this case said something that completely changed the way I see those moments. What if those mistakes were not mistakes? Let me explain that, because I know it sounds a little strange. There is something that researchers have studied in criminal behavior called staging. Staging is when someone deliberately arranges a scene to look a certain way, to point investigators in a different direction, or to make themselves look like something they are not. Now take that idea a step further. What if someone who is smart enough to plan a careful, deliberate entry into a home also chose to leave behind a few small things that looked like mistakes? What if they wanted investigators to think this was done by someone nervous and untrained? What if they left the paper bag on purpose, knowing it would not hold fingerprints anyway? What if they let the camera catch a brief angle of their face,
knowing that the mask covered enough, because disabling the camera completely would have looked too suspicious, especially to someone who knew cameras had recently been installed. Think about that last point. If you knew exactly when that camera was put in, because you had been inside that home recently, you would also know that a suddenly disabled camera might raise a flag right away. So you leave it running. You let it record something, just not enough. If this interpretation is right, then the careless figure on that footage is not careless at all. They are calculated. And that brings us to the final detail, the one built around 4 hours. Just 4 hours.
On the last day that Nancy Guthrie was seen, there is a specific window of time that investigators have focused on very closely. 4 hours. During those 4 hours, something shifted. Nancy stopped answering her phone. Her usual routine, a routine her family and friends knew well, changed. The calls went unanswered. The patterns broke. Now think about this. If something happens to a person during a specific time of day, investigators need to know 2 things. First, where was the person? Second, where was everyone close to them? And so the question was asked of Tommaso Cioni. Where were you during those 4 hours? His answer, according to sources familiar with the investigation, was described as incomplete. Not a lie, not a contradiction. Incomplete. And I want to make sure you understand the difference because it matters. An incomplete account means there are gaps, things that were not explained, time that was not fully accounted for. People have incomplete accounts all the time. I could not tell you exactly where I was at 2 p.m. on a random Tuesday 3 weeks ago. Most people could not. That is normal.
I want to be real with you right now. Everything we have talked about so far, the glove, the eyebrows, the way the figure moved, the 4-hour window, none of it is a confirmed conclusion. None of it has produced a charge or a conviction. It is all circumstantial. That word sounds dismissive, but it is not. Circumstantial evidence is still evidence. It has sent people to prison, and it has also freed people who should never have been there. Context matters. And the honest truth about this case is that there is a second explanation that cannot be dismissed. The stranger, the outsider, someone who had been watching Nancy Guthrie from a distance, learning her routines, studying her home, but not someone she knew. Here is why that possibility has to be taken seriously. In the weeks before she disappeared, Nancy apparently received some communications that made her uneasy, messages or contacts that felt off to her. The full details of those communications have not been released publicly. That matters, because if someone was reaching out to Nancy in a way that unsettled her, that person existed, and investigators need to find that person. Second, and this is important, the level of preparation shown in that footage is exactly what you would see from someone who had been watching a target from the outside for a long time.
A person who is obsessed with someone else's life can learn a tremendous amount just by observing from a distance. They can learn schedules, they can study a home layout, they can know when someone is usually alone. They do not need to have been invited inside to know where the front door camera is. So here we have 2 very different roads. Both are real. Both are possible. And this brings us to the hardest part of this entire conversation. The part where I have to ask you, and I have to ask myself, are we seeing this case clearly? Or are we seeing what we want to see? There is something that happens to all of us when we follow a case like this. We form an early opinion, and then, without even realizing it, we start to see every new detail through that opinion. We give extra weight to things that support what we already believe, and we quietly explain away the things that don't fit. Researchers have a name for this. They call it confirmation bias, and it is one of the biggest dangers in true crime, for investigators, for journalists, and yes, for people watching videos like this one. So let me try to be honest with you about every single detail we covered today. The single glove, it matches a known habit, but plenty of people wear one glove. It could mean nothing.
Authorities have released images and videos of a subject they want to identify in their search for missing 84-year-old Nancy Guthrie.
The eyebrow match,
Analysts said consistent, but consistent is not conclusive. Similar brows exist on many faces.